Most food labeling challenges are actually a symptom of a broader issue in the MPD process. Part of the difficulty in producing and maintaining accurate labeling and disclosures is the fact that many organizations just don't have sufficient tools to manage the complexity and traceability necessary to ensure that teams can confidently pull together all the information and changes, then properly validate and synthesize those into outputs that they feel confident about. Don't get me wrong, I mean, we work with teams all over the world and they're doing their utmost to get this right, but it's a world of heroics and diving catches. And while teams get it right most of the time, there's significant risk in the products that do go to market with errors. So while the most recognizable part of the process is the actual creation of the label data and the label graphic, the actual process of labeling runs all the way into the early interactions with suppliers, all the way through development and maintenance of the products that are in market. So creating the label is just the tip of the iceberg. Talk about what lies beneath the water in the food labeling process. What kind of processes and data and tools support the overall labeling capability? So most people recognize the basics, that you have to have some basic level of recipe management and the ability to derive technical label data and develop things like allergen and ingredient declarations. But that's only helping you understand what you've done at the very end. Ideally, you want to be able to understand early in the process whether or not you're going to hit your targets and to be compliant. So actually having tools that help with formula design and analysis is critical. But that said, the great majority of companies are still developing formulations in Excel, which has, obviously a number of limitations. All this would be difficult if you were just developing a single formula for each new product, but the reality is that you're often developing dozens of variants just to get to one final formula that will be used in market. Additionally, there's a lot of necessary maintenance activities where recipes need to be redeveloped for cost, compliance, or supply chain reasons. And so organizations are developing and modifying far more recipes every month than you might realize. Outside the basics, there's a need for additional tools and automation around things like claims and compliance assessments, and for adapting product disclosures based on the needs of the local markets that you're selling into. There's many regulatory activities that are happening throughout development and commercialization and through maintenance in the market. And not all of these are actually reflected on the label, but they are very important to ensuring that you're actually shipping and selling products that are compliant and that you're providing the necessary level of transparency to your customers and to consumers. But in order to make sure that all this aggregate information that you're using at the recipe and product level is correct, you have to collect a massive amount of structured and document-based information about your ingredients, packaging, and suppliers. This information has to be solicited and collected from suppliers. It's got to be validated by different areas of your organization. It's got to go through workflows and approvals. Then it's got to be actively managed to maintain the completeness and the accuracy of this over time. This is a massive effort. And if the information is not well managed, it means that the information you're kind of evaluating at the recipe and product level will not be accurate, right? So despite your best efforts, you'll be putting potentially incorrect information out into the market. This is a massive amount of information already due to regulatory customer requirements, and it actually keeps growing year on year. Besides the information and the materials you're procuring, there's also a lot of documentation and information that you need to keep up with on the suppliers themselves to make sure that they're actually meeting safety standards and that you have the traceability required for internal and external audits. So once you have all the underlying information needed to produce accurate information at the raw material, recipe, and label level, you still have significant work to do to get this out into the market accurately. You've got to produce product information sheets that include labeling information, but also a lot of other relevant details about your final product that needs to be shared internally with your supply chain partners and with customers. You have to have change management processes and controls in place and the right level of syndication and visibility to ensure that internal and external teams are aligned. So basically, once you've done everything right, you still need to make sure that all this information gets out to the right people at the right time. Finally, you have to maintain and ensure the accuracy of this data long term. So as we said, labeling is not a one-time event. It starts from the very first moment you engage with the suppliers about an ingredient, and it really never stops until you stop producing that product. So once you're in market, you have to continually monitor to make sure that your labels continue to meet the local requirements. And you also have to monitor for risk or impact due to changes in your recipe, your suppliers, or your ingredients. So as you can see here, there's a long chain of dependencies and related information required to produce accurate labeling for a single product. We have to understand every dependency this product has upstream and understand anything that happens could impact what it is that we're producing and what we're disclosing to the market. So you can see what a monumental task this is for teams to manage in any food and beverage organization. Many large organizations have invested in large vendor platforms to help manage these processes, but the great majority of food and beverage companies are still trying to tackle labeling and the larger new product development process using a patchwork of tools and approaches that you'll probably recognize. There's quite a bit of work that's still being done using things like email, which is obviously very difficult to keep track of and manage. There's a lot of information that has to be tracked down by calling up colleagues and suppliers. Documents and a lot of key product data is still very often wrangled using things like SharePoint, Excel, and Word. There's often some point solutions in place to manage small parts of the process. So maybe something that helps manage things like vendor compliance or maybe a document management system. And a lot of times people may have something that manages the actual label generation, but as we noted, it's just managing the actual label itself, and managing just the label generation is missing a lot of critical needs elsewhere in the process. So the result is a very manual, very messy process that is unable to scale and nearly impossible for humans to actually successfully manage despite best efforts. So outside of the extraordinary time and effort required to manage this complex process and the high volume of information, there's also extraordinary risk that comes with trying to manage the new product development and labeling process without the help of any purpose-built tools. There's obviously financial and reputational impact that comes with labeling issues, it being one of the chief causes of food recalls. That can lead to obviously a lot of recall costs, potential fines, legal risk, and recalls also lead to notable erosion of consumer trust, with some recalls noted to cause permanent damage to the brand. More importantly, there's serious impacts to health and the well-being of consumers. There's a significant portion of the population that have food allergies, many that could suffer serious injury or even death on something like a mislabeling of an allergen. So I think it's easy to see that after the process we just looked at, how easily a small mistake in a change to a supplier or an ingredient could be missed when it comes to monitoring and identifying potential allergens that need to be disclosed.